Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 25 of Ooh, Real Stories. Tonight we will have 3 paranormal stories for you, so without any further ado, let's get started. When I was little, about 8 or 10 years old, I was lying in bed trying to sleep, but hadn't actually fallen asleep yet. My bedroom door was open and the hallway light was still on. Suddenly, I felt someone kiss my cheek. I thought it was my mom coming in to say goodnight. I opened my eyes, but instead of my mom, what I was seeing was a figure made of pure light. It stood over me for a brief moment and then left the room faster than any human could travel. I laid there for a moment, somewhat freaked out. I finally called for my mom and asked her if she had been in my room. She said no. I think back to this moment and I've always wondered who it could have been. If it was actually someone at all or just my imagination. Both my mom and dad passed away within the last few years, and it has made me wonder if the dead can travel at any point in time, and if ghosts are even real. Maybe that was my dead grandfather who I saw. He was the only one that was close to me who had passed away, but he died many years prior to this incident. Or maybe that it was one of my parents visiting me as a child again. Who knows? Maybe it was even myself from a future time after I die. Anyways, it's something I'll probably never have an answer for, but I have always thought about. Has anybody ever been visited by a light being before? Interesting story. More questions than answers, but I feel like I have not really heard any other experiences like this to answer their question. It was definitely very interesting. Okay, so our protagonist is a child, about 8 to 10, and they're lying in bed trying to sleep. A bedroom door was open and a hallway light was on. Then, they felt someone kiss their cheek, and they thought it was their mom coming in to say goodnight, and that would be a logical conclusion. But they opened their eyes, and instead of their mom, what they were seeing was a figure made of pure light. So, I don't know if, a god came in and kissed her, but that was very weird if they did. I don't know who it could be that it would be not weird, I'm not gonna lie. Unless it was maybe a family member, but even then, that's just I don't know, it's weird. They think that the only person that they were close to who had died even somewhat recently was the grandfather, but even that was a stretch. They weren't, obviously they don't have answers, but they were speculating as to if that was one of the possibilities. I kind of liked the one theory that was a little more out there, but it was maybe it was another version of themselves who had passed away or was from a different universe or a future time after they died. I like those type of answers because I like a lot of the theories about, multiverses and other realities and deja vu. I love all of that. So it was definitely a little reminiscent of that for me. That's kind of where I landed because I never really hear of ghosts being pure light. Most of the time they're able to be made out from what I understand. I don't know what basic ghost rules we're going by here. I'm just going off what I've heard of, but I've never really heard that before. But I guess it could exist. We don't really have the answers, but I think that the story was definitely very interesting because it's just very thought-provoking. We'll be back with more terrifying stories right after this word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. If you think you might be feeling depressed, stressed, anxious, or overwhelmed, today's sponsor, BetterHelp, is here to help you. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you. Talk to your therapist in an online environment at your convenience. There is a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's network of 20,000 therapists that give you access to help that may not be available in your area. You just fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs, and then you can get matched with a therapist in as little as 48 hours. Then you schedule video and phone sessions, and you can even exchange unlimited messages with your therapists. You can also request a new therapist at no additional charge at any time. So join the 3 million plus people who have taken charge of their mental health with an experienced BetterHelp therapist. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/realstories. That's betterhelp.com/realstories. All one word. Ever since I was a kid, I've always had a fascination with the paranormal. I'm not sure how to word this, but I'll do my best. Anything paranormal caught my interest, but I always had a healthy amount of skepticism. This event made me a believer, though. One of my best friends had moved into a new place with his fiancée. I came over after they had been there for a few weeks, and we stood in his driveway and were just talking. From his driveway, you can see into the hall and all the way down into the bedroom. I looked over and I saw a man in a Navy plumber's outfit walk into his bedroom. I looked over to him and asked him if he was having some work done. He looked very confused and said, "No." I was like, "Dude, I just saw a guy in a blue..." Before I could even finish my sentence, his fiancée butted in a freaking blue jumpsuit? I told you." Turns out she had seen the same guy a few days prior, and my friend had just laughed it off. We did some digging, and sure enough, that guy used to live there and was one of the local plumbers. He died in the house. Oh, okay, so that was a really good story. So we have this person who is hanging out at their friend's house, and they have always been, fascinated with the paranormal, although they weren't really sure how real it was. And when they're at their friend's house, they're just talking in the driveway, and they look into the window, and they see somebody in there, and they could vividly see them wearing this blue jumpsuit. I'm assuming it's almost like a Dickie suit, like the full one, kind of like Loki, like the one that Chappelle wears. So he sees something like that, and he's like, "Oh, are you getting work done?" And the friend's like, "No, why would you say that?" And he's like, "I was just looking in there and I saw this guy in a blue." And then before he can even finish that, his fiance butts in and is like, "In a blue freaking jumpsuit. I told you." And I can literally hear that dialogue. That is so, oh my God, that happens all the time because people have such skepticism for ghosts. And then it must have felt so good for the fiance to have her, her experience legitimized by this dude's cosign because he saw the same thing. Because that's so frustrating for people who see things and then are called crazy for seeing them. And it's not like I'm hallucinating or anything. Sober people are seeing these things and they're not all explainable. How do you explain seeing a person? That's a whole person. And somebody else saw the same one. That's a ghost. They had the exact same experience. But no, so that was a really good story. I liked that it was very relatable, and I liked that it's kind of spooky. It's not that, ooh, it's so scary, but it's that's legitimately spooky. I saw the same ghost that you saw. So that legitimizes it, like I said. So it's just really interesting to, see that. Because a lot of these times, the sightings or the experiences, whatever you want to call it, when they're corroborated by 2 or more people, they make the skeptics think. Because then it's whoa, if they both saw it, then how could we explain this away? And they can't. So definitely a really good story. Alrighty, guys, let's get into our third and final scary story of the night. I have worked on a psych unit for 3 years. The unit itself is right above an active ER in the mostly empty hospital. Strange things happen a lot in our unit and the hospital at large. Call lights will go off in empty rooms, and sometimes call lights will go off in units that have not been used since the place was fully functioning over a decade ago. Me and the rest of the staff have heard footsteps, have had things pushed off tables, and on the old units, you get the ever-present feeling that someone is right behind you. Everyone knows about it. The older staff attribute it to a patient who died on the unit who no one knows the name of, but we all call George. George seems pretty benevolent and just likes to mess with us. One night in particular, I had gone back to the old unit because that's where we keep our copy paper and supplies. I get the feeling that I always get, which is someone is behind me, but this time I hear footsteps. Thinking it was security doing their rounds, I look to check, and not a soul is back there but me. This was confirmed when I went back out and security had just come up the elevator. Most of the older staff have a George story, and all of the ER and security especially do. One night we had a call light keep coming on and off, and one of our medical charts had been slammed to the floor, almost as if it were timed, because everything had just gotten quiet. We all sighed and said, "Cut it out, George." And sure enough, nothing else happened that night. All of this can be chalked up to coincidence, faulty wiring, and the hospital just being super creepy. Our older security guards claim to have seen George, but who knows? I like to think we have a little paranormal prankster. Never a dull moment on this unit. Wow, I really like that story. I like that George is kind of just messing with them, but he doesn't do people harm or hurt anybody. So that's, it's almost like a sitcom where at the end when they were like, "Cut it out, George." It's like, that just seems like something that would happen in a ghostly sitcom, which they now have. I haven't watched it, but there is a ghost inspired sitcom that I keep seeing commercials for, so maybe I'll have to check that out. But if anybody's seen it, let me know how it is, because then I won't have to waste my time if it's trash. But I do like that the ghosts are going mainstream, because, a lot of people don't truly believe in them, but a lot of people aren't hip, because sometimes people like to avoid the topic, or they just are like, "Oh, I need proof," and then you show them proof and they're like, "Oh, that's fake." So, it's hard to say, but I feel like a lot of people have experiences, as we know from the dozens that we've covered on this show, but it's just such an interesting phenomenon, and I'm glad that it's getting more widespread attention, even if it is in a goofy sitcom-y way. But back to this story. So, George is what they call this guy who is a spirit who kind of messes around in this old psych unit. One of the things that was also weirding me out in this story, just from a grammar standpoint, was they say they've worked on a psych unit, not in a psych unit. So that was throwing me. It will happen a lot on our unit. And then it says at the end, "Never a dull moment on the unit." Why is it not in? I don't know, but maybe I'm just stupid, but that was kind of making me laugh. But no, so George, he's probably the reason that people often experience the feeling of being watched. So he'll make people uncomfortable with that. And then apparently he is prone to just doing things to kind of scare people, like dropping a clipboard or slamming a door, just other hijinks. So I feel like George is kind of a funny ghost. And maybe that's just his style. He was just somebody who just liked to mess with people. Maybe maybe George was a comedian. Maybe it was the ghost of George Carlin. Who knows? I love George Carlin. But no, it was crazy. And then even in the comments, another person said when they worked in a haunted building, they called their ghost George too. And he liked to mess with them. And other people also like said, oh, same here. So apparently George is just a good ghost name. I don't know if people like the G and G alliteration, but I guess George is good. It's better than like Casper or something. I don't know. Really interesting. I am not surprised though that a psych unit would have, such a connection with the afterlife, because they have such tortured souls in the physical world that are just suffering from, these conditions. And a lot of them, there can be violence, there can be certain unaliving themselves actions that, can take place in psych units. And just in hospitals in general, people are dying, not all the time, but with a certain level of frequency where death is not new to the hospital staff. So it's really surprising that ghosts do not haunt more hospitals. And that's another show that I just watched the other day on the Travel Channel, because apparently the Travel Channel is like low-key morphed into a ghost network, because they had all these different ghost shows. And of course I had to watch them. No, but I was watching one called Haunted Hospitals, and it was crazy, because this is such a common occurrence for the reasons that we just discussed, that they made a whole show about it. And it's like people will come in and, give their testimonial. Similarly to this story where they just film it and they also act it out, which is also always very entertaining to see the reenactments. But no, highly recommend. 10 out of 10 for sure. And then they try and say like, oh, this can all be chalked up to coincidence, faulty wiring. No. I'll give it to you. A lot of ghostly, experiences that people have, or things where they're like, what was that? Things are explained. I'll give you. Even if it was like 60, 70% of those were explained by, some, whatever, light issue or random freak occurrence. That means that there's 30 or 40% that you cannot explain. And that is the 30 to 40% that I care about. So I am happy to have read this story. It was great. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully George keeps on. I don't know. Is it mean to say that I hope he keeps on keeping on? Because he's just kind of messing with people. He's not like really doing anything too sinister. So I support you, George. Alrighty, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of Real Stories. And today you have heard, I'm curious if anyone has had something like this ever happen to them, by Ace of Mace. And then 2 stories from Marshall Dill 26. First, George the Psych Ward Ghost. And secondly, the Working Man Ghost. All stories were read with the permission of their respective authors, and if you have a story that you'd like to hear on the show, email it to me at thearspodcast@gmail.com. That's thearspodcast@gmail.com, and you can remain anonymous. And remember to go to betterhelp.com/realstories for 10% off your first month of therapy with BetterHelp, and get matched with a therapist who will listen and help you. I want to thank you guys again for listening, and I will see you next week for a brand new episode.